I don't know why I pretended I didn't know that it was called Chipwrecked. I also just didn't want to say Chipwrecked. So there's that.
Now you've said it like 4 times.
Yeah. Thanks for forcing me to do that. Welcome, nerds, to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. You can find us on all the social media, including Facebook. You can like us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/the Nerds Podcast. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at the Nerds Podcast. You can check out all of our content on our website, thenerdspodcast.com, including our YouTube channel, which you can find on our website by clicking the YouTube channel tab. But you can also find it, of course, on youtube.com/the Nerds Podcast, or just by searching the Nerds You're Looking For on YouTube. And we both have Letterboxd accounts, which, if you're not familiar, is basically just the website and app for watching movies. You can track, rate, review every movie that you've watched. We both have accounts. I'm at the Nerds Podcast. My co-host is at that Tyler Hunt. My name is Patrick Kuhn, and I am joined by my co-host, as always, that Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
I am doing pretty good, man. How are you?
Well, I don't know if you watched my review, my Facebook Live review on Friday. I didn't see you jump on, so I know you didn't watch it live.
So I don't want to interrupt you, and I know you're probably going into a story, but if I had to sit and listen to you talk about what men want for 30 minutes, it would be a punishment for me, and it's supposed to be a punishment for you. So no, I did not watch all of it.
Fair enough. But I am going to tell a story. So not only was that movie really, really bad, awful.
Good.
Very predictable.
Good.
Bad acting. Not funny at all. I literally laughed 0 times. It was really easy for me to keep track of how many times I laughed in that movie because it was 0. And I think it was pretty easy for me to keep track of how many times the 20 other people in the theater laughed, because it was maybe 4 or 5 times. As a group, nobody laughed at this movie. But the story that I'm about to tell, is just how fucking awkward of a movie-going experience this was for me. So I know you're smiling. I know that's the point why you picked this movie, was because you knew it was going to be bad, and you knew that it wasn't necessarily made for me, and that was true. I don't think it was made for a lot of people because it just wasn't funny. But just the disrespect for anyone watching it was like the whole group just was like, we're not going to respect anybody that's watching this movie right now. Not that I cared about the movie, but people were getting up. They were just having full-on conversations. Somebody kept getting up and using their phone as a flashlight, just getting up and walking around. Not oh, I'm going to leave. I'm just going to walk around the theater using my flashlight. They were just they were in their own living room. It was really ridiculous. But the cherry on top of all of this was the weirdest fucking thing that I've ever seen, mostly in my life. One of the weirdest things I've ever seen in my life, but by far the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me watching a movie. I literally saw someone changing a baby 3 seats away from me in the theater. I could not believe it. I heard the Velcro or whatever it is of the diaper, and I was like, what the fuck is happening? And so I looked to the left of me, and literally 3 seats away from me, there was a naked baby, and someone was changing the baby. This movie was rated R, and there was multiple babies, infant babies in this movie, and one of them needed to be changed.
So I wish that I could say I was completely shocked, but I think I've brought it up before. I used to work at a movie theater in high school, and I was a doorman, so we cleaned up the theater after everybody was done. And I worked there for 2 years, and it didn't happen a lot, but probably 2 or 3 times I had to clean up dirty diapers that people left behind.
No way. I would just be like, you do not pay me enough money to pick up somebody's dirty diaper.
Yeah, it's super fucked up, man. And it makes me wonder if this kind of shit happens in a theater more than we realize, and it just happens in movies that we typically wouldn't go to, like What Men Want.
Yeah, I don't understand. First of all, why you would even bring a baby into a movie like that. I don't get why people bring like infant babies into movies at all. Like I just don't understand the desire to do that. Like, first of all, they're never going to remember that they saw this movie, even if it's age appropriate. And all you're doing is you're giving everybody around you an excuse to hate you because they're going to cry. And what pissed me off, not necessarily more than the diaper change, was that same family. Like, at one point, the guy kind of like, he wasn't really yelling at the baby, but he was like getting on the baby about like crying. And I'm like, fuck, the baby's not being bad. It's not like it's acting out. It's acting like a fucking baby. Why did you bring it into a 2-hour fucking movie? If it was any movie that I cared about, I would have been so pissed and I probably would have said something to him. But I didn't, because I really didn't give a fuck. And I actually thought while he was changing the baby, as awkward as it is, there was a part of me in the back of my head, I was like, this is going to make for a really fun story on the podcast. So at least I have that. But it was such a weird movie to bring a little kid in. And there was multiple babies in this movie.
Not even so like, excited to see What Men Want that they're like, I got to see it opening day. I don't care that I can't find a sitter. The baby's coming.
Yeah, I don't even understand it, because it wasn't like this couple had multiple babies and they were the only babies in there. This couple had one baby, and then there was other couples with other babies. So there was multiple couples that thought it was a good idea to bring a baby, and I really wanted them to walk out, because there's a multiple scenes where I was like, there shouldn't be a baby in this movie. Because, I mean, it's rated R. There's, I wouldn't say graphic sex scenes in this movie. There is a moment where they whip out a bong that is shaped like a cock and balls.
As I was
like, yeah, as you do. So, I mean, it's very kind of a raunchy comedy, which I'm not a prude by any means. Like, I don't think that people should necessarily stick to like, oh, it's rated R, you can't see this until you're 16, 17, 18. I think that there should be a rolling scale. Like, if you know your kid and you know that they're pretty responsible and they can put things in perspective. Like, I've talked about this a lot before, and I kind of talked about it when I did my review on Friday, is like, my parents were very cool about me seeing movies. I saw some movies that I definitely shouldn't have seen, but I usually saw them with my parents, and they were able to put them in perspective. And there was a couple of scenes, I mentioned this in the review, like I saw Rising Sun with my parents, and there's a very, I guess, graphic rape scene in that movie, and they made me like shield my eyes or whatever. But that's kind of the only part of a movie that I remember seeing with my parents. They're like, yeah, you can't watch this movie, or at least this part of the movie. So it was like years after that movie had come out did I actually see the whole movie from start to finish, because I had to close my eyes during that scene when I was a kid. But like, I think that's the way that parents should be. So it's not like I'm being a prude and be like, oh, it's rated R, you can't be in this movie. But like, at a certain point, like when they start whipping out the cock and ball bong, maybe an infant child should not be in this movie.
Yeah, so I think that raises a question for me. So neither one of us have kids, but you're in your 30s, I'm almost 30, and we've talked about it before. Like, we will both probably start families at some point. So let's say it's Avengers Endgame, and you got to see it opening day, and you can't find a sitter. What do you do?
Well, in my case, given the fact that we're going to review it on the podcast, Chrissy would just have to stay home.
Chrissy, you've got to take a vacation day, because I got to see Avengers.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for sure. That would happen. But I feel like in a regular family, you would just wait until you could see it. Like, until you got a sitter. Like, that's the thing that I get the most irritated about. Like, I understand, like, if you're a nerd and you want to see a movie, like, I get that. I'm right there with you. But you have this other thing that takes precedent over everything. And for a long time, and not to get too deep and like personal about this, but like, for the longest time, like, I didn't want to have kids, because even when we first got married, like, I told my wife, like, I'm a selfish person, and I don't know if I'm ready to necessarily put something over what I want to do and how I want to live my life. So that was kind of my biggest holdup. And now I'm over that. And I've kind of matured since then. That was like 7-8 years ago. But when you're a parent, that's what has to happen. You have to, this is the most important thing in your life. And if you don't get to see what men want the Friday afternoon that it comes out, then so be it.
For sure. I mean, is that like, that's one of the biggest thoughts that crosses my mind when I think about having kids is like, am I going to be able to go see the movies I want to see? Like, I think my wife's pretty cool, and I think that she realizes this is a pretty important part of my life for me. So,
Absolutely.
you know, she'd watch the kid and let me go see a movie once a week or whatever that looks like. But I'd also be super disappointed because then I wouldn't be seeing certain movies with my wife. So, yeah, I think that I might still be lingering into that selfish category a little bit.
For sure. And just another piece of evidence that you're a better husband, because I wouldn't give a shit about not seeing the movie with my wife. I'd be like, oh, I'm going to go see it. See ya. Deuces. All right, so if this is your first episode, we start off each episode by kind of just checking in with each other. Like we said, we're very busy guys, and we don't get to have these nerdy conversations as often as we used to. So we like to just start off the episode by just kind of checking in with each other. So what are you into this week?
So my wife and I watched a documentary last night on Netflix that I think is starting to gain some popularity because it's insane, and I'm going to get into it, but it's called Abducted in Plain Sight. So it was actually recommended to me by a guy I work with. So thanks, Brandon, for this recommendation, because this was definitely a strange documentary, to say the least. So I really want to talk about it at length because it's truly shocking, but I don't feel like I can because it's definitely something that you should experience without any preconceived notions. So I am going to be pretty general here. You know, I'll give a general synopsis and I'll give some general thoughts that I want to share, but I won't get into too many specifics because, again, if you haven't seen it, you need to go in blind. So apparently, like I said, this documentary is generating a lot of buzz because while it debuted at film festivals, I think in 2017, and then it was also at some film festivals last year in 2018, it was, again, just made recently available on Netflix. And Netflix is on a roll with some of these documentaries like the Fire Festival and now this, and I think this is going to be one that people are talking about a lot. So as you can probably tell from the title, this documentary does deal with an abduction, actually more than one abduction, and a truly horrifying experience that a family went through in the 70s. Their daughter was basically brainwashed, abused, raped, and kidnapped all in front of them by a family friend named Berchtold, or B, as he's called most of the documentary. And the documentary dives into why these events transpired and the decision-making process behind particular incidents that made these terrible things easy for B to accomplish. And while, again, I don't want to get into specifics because the plot points are too ludicrous to spoil, it's truly shocking, and you will be infuriated as you watch this movie. So what makes things even more impressive, in my opinion, about this documentary is how simple it is. It's basically just interviews with the family and a few select others with honestly some poorly done recreation scenes that depict the story that's being told on the screen in a few places, but the subject itself and the events that transpired are crazy enough and are intriguing enough that the documentary doesn't need to do anything else to capture your buy-in for an hour and a half. So I thought that was pretty impressive. The other thing about the story itself is, and it just kind of proves how crazy it is that there isn't some huge cliffhanger you're waiting to figure out. From the start of the interview process on camera, they are talking to Jan, which is the daughter that was the subject to the kidnapping and rape, and she's completely competent as an adult at this point, so you know that at the end of the story, she makes it out not only alive, but grows up to get past these events as best she can. But the twists and turns of the events are so insane that you're waiting for a next layer to be added onto the nonsense as the documentary progresses, and the results of what happened aren't even what you're interested in. So it's definitely about the journey, not the destination in this documentary. So yeah, if you haven't watched this documentary yet, I definitely suggest it. It's one of the stranger and probably most infuriating documentaries I've watched in a long time, and it will definitely fuck with your emotions.
Oh, yeah. So I watched this last night as well. My wife and I were looking for something to watch, and we settled on this one because similar to what you were talking about, like I've heard several people suggest this documentary. So I was definitely intrigued by it. We loved like true crime documentaries, and so we were all in when we started watching this film. And I think that it was a really smart point that you brought up, that it's a very simple documentary because it doesn't need any flash. Like, the story itself is just crazy enough that you can just have this really simple documentary where the camera's static and it just sits in front of the person as they tell the story. And they do have some really shitty recreations, but other than that, that's it. Like, it's just these people talking about what happened and mixed with these recreations, and that's it. That's all they have. And the story itself is crazy enough to hold your attention, and it gets really fucked up really quickly. And it gets to the point where you think, okay, well, it can't get any crazier, and then it doesn't. And like you said, I don't want to spoil anything because it is better to go in completely fresh, because it will just knock you back how fucking crazy it is. And we were just talking about how neither one of us have kids, so I hope that it doesn't come off as like somebody not having kids telling somebody else that has kids how to raise them. But come on, brah. Like, you have to say, like, there's a point in the movie, pretty early in the movie, they're just like, why the fuck would they let this person continue to interact with this child? Like, come on. You just need to put your foot down. Like, I get that they were nice people, they were very religious, and they wanted to be forgiving and understanding, and he was a family friend, blah, blah, blah. But at a certain point, you're just like, dude, get the fuck away from us.
Yeah, no kidding, man. So I did another segment of things that my wife says when we watch a movie during
Awesome.
This one, and it's not near as good as that Silence of the Lambs one was, but I think that it adds some emotion to what we're talking about here. So I have a few things my wife said. So, why didn't they just call the cops? That little girl looks like Scarlett Johansson. How do you know that, you fucker? What the fuck? She must be really stupid. That's fucking nuts. And finally, the one that I think sums it up the best, they're all idiots. Which is pretty much. So yeah, definitely a weird documentary, man. I'm glad to hear that we're on the same page with how absurd it is.
Yeah, and I kind of at the end felt conflicted because the dad is somewhat of a sympathetic character, especially at the end. Like, he's talking about how it's his job as a father to protect his family and his, most notably, his daughters in this case. And so you kind of feel sorry for him, but at the same time, like, fuck you, dude. Like, you fucked up. You done fucked up, dude. Like, I don't want to sit here and say, especially in the 70s, like serial killers, and that's something that they talk about in the Ted Bundy tapes, and pedophiles, like, that wasn't even a term back then. Like, pedophiles wasn't something that people talked about. So I'm hesitant and conflicted to criticize him, but at the same time, it's like, at a certain point, you done fucked up. Like, why didn't you just say, dude, get the fuck away from my kids?
No kidding, man. I heard that he passed away last November. So
Really?
While that's sad, I'm glad that he's not seen all of the memes that have started to be created about some of the stuff that he admits to in this documentary, because he seems like he was like a pretty genuine person, but unfortunately that led to a lot of terrible things for his daughter.
Yeah, and you kind of, again, feel sorry for him because he's a very trusting and forgiving guy, and unfortunately a lot of times those are the people that get taken advantage the most, and he definitely got taken advantage of.
For sure he did, man.
Yeah, in more ways than one.
With that being said, what are you into?
So I am into the new free-to-play Battle Royale game that was made by Respawn, who also made the Titanfall games. It is called Apex Legends, excuse me. And it surprised a lot of people. It was teased a little bit, kind of leaked over the weekend, this past weekend. And they finally dropped a trailer for it on Monday officially, and then they released the game later that day. Unlike some Battle Royale games, it's actually first-person. It's a first-person shooter, which is good for me because I'm used to like Halo and Call of Duty being that first-person shooter. One of the many reasons why I'm not great at Fortnite is because I'm not super awesome at third-person shooters. So I was happy about that. And it also, what's cool about this game is it takes from other Battle Royale games. It takes a little Call of Duty Black Ops. It takes a little PUBG, even a little bit of Overwatch, which I know is not a Battle Royale game, but it does take a little bit from that. So it kind of just, it picks the best things from all these other games and kind of incorporates it into this game, which doesn't always work out. Like that Frankenstein monster doesn't always work out, but it really works out in this particular game. So if you're not aware, Apex Legends, you can pick one of several different legends. Each of them has different abilities for each different playstyle. I particularly like the Pathfinder robot because he has a grappling hook as his special ability, and I think that works really well for my playstyle, especially in this game early on, because I'm really bad and I run away a lot because I'm a little bitch, and the grappling hook allows me to get away very quickly. I'm a terrible teammate, and I will just, if we get into like this huge firefight, I just fucking bail quickly. But what's good about Pathfinder is that you can use your special ability. It has like it's like you have a tactical ability and then you have something else that it's called, and I can't remember what that special ability is, but Pathfinder can build a grappling hook that your whole team can use. So while I'm running away, my other teammates could also run away, but they typically don't because they play the game the way I think you're supposed to. But that's just how I play, is I bail pretty quickly. Unfortunately, Apex Legends only has squads right now. There is a rumor that they are adding solo and duos. I think they just kind of dropped it the way it was and kind of wanted to test the waters a little bit, and it's blowing up right now. And so now they're going to probably add solo and duos, which is good because, like I said, I'm a bad teammate and I don't need to be playing with other people. I need to be playing solo or duos because Tyler, we could play this together in duos. You know how bad of a teammate I am. You're already used to it. Yeah. So I don't think that would be that big of a deal.
The worst, for sure.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So you drop as a squad of 3. There are no weapons, shields, or anything but your special abilities. So there's been several moments where I've dropped and there's been another teammate, or there's been another squad that drops pretty close, and it's just kind of a rush to get to those guns. And there's been a couple of games where I didn't get there quick enough, and there's nothing I can do because their whole squad has a gun and I don't have a gun, and so it's just like I'm dead in the water. So you do have that every once in a while. There was a Battle Royale game that I played for a little bit called Darwin Project, where it's kind of more Hunger Games and you start off with a bow and arrow. Like that's how you drop, and I thought that was kind of interesting. That game never really took off, but it was interesting that you didn't have to do that scramble for weapons. So it makes it a little bit more intense, but at the same time, it does kind of lead to those games where if you don't get that weapon right off the bat, you're fucked. So it does kind of get a little irritating after a while. But like I said, it's very similar to Fortnite, the way that you kind of have to rush, gather weapons and items. There's not as many people in this game as in Fortnite. It's a little bit bigger of a map and there's less squads in the game. So it does add to a little bit of a slower beginning to each match, but there is a storm like in Fortnite and PUBG and all this other Battle Royale games. So they do eventually kind of make you go into a smaller circle and a smaller area to fight one another. Hopefully at that point, you've gotten a lot of good loot and a lot of good weapons. What's really cool about this game, and kind of works out for me because I'm a very antisocial person. Typically when I play games online, I don't have my microphone on. I really don't talk to much people unless I'm playing with Tyler or Jeff or whoever. So they actually have a function in this game where you can basically play without talking to the people. Like you can communicate. They have a ping system where you can literally ping things on the map, like weapons and guns and ammo and stuff like that. And you can kind of talk to your teammates in a way through the game without actually having to talk to them on their microphone. So that's kind of cool. So I do appreciate that. And with free-to-play games, of course, you have the whole worry about, well, how they're going to make money. Is there going to be microtransactions? And, of course, there are microtransactions. I was especially worried with this game because Respawn just recently got bought out by EA, and EA is notorious for having a lot of microtransactions and not being super transparent about those microtransactions. But I think that Respawn has done a really good job so far. Everything's cosmetic that I can think of. that I've come across. Everything's been cosmetic. There is 2 legends that you can't get unless you buy them. So that's kind of a bummer, but at the same time, there's plenty. I want to say that there's like 7 or 8 that you can pick from just by downloading the free version of this game. And actually, you can unlock those 2 legends without paying money. It's just going to take you a while. So everything in this game, you can actually theoretically unlock just by playing, and a lot of it's just skins and stuff like that. Like I said, most of everything that you can unlock other than those 2 legends is completely transparent, and even those legends, it's not like they're super overpowered or anything like that. Every legend has its different ability, and they all kind of balance each other out. And one good thing about this game is, because it's a squad-based game, it's kind of like Overwatch, where if one person picks that legend, you can't also pick that legend. So it kind of forces you to be good at more than one. Pathfinder is not a very popular one, so I generally don't have to run into that problem. So normally nobody picks Pathfinder, so I'm usually pretty good. I've actually don't think I've had a match where somebody's picked it before I got a chance to pick it. So that's pretty good. And I know that it's kind of taking the video game environment or culture by storm at this point. I know I've kind of checked on Twitch every once in a while. Like I'm bored at work, I'm just curious. I'll check on Twitch, and pretty much every time I've checked, Apex Legends since Monday has had double the viewers as Fortnite right now. And I know a lot of people are freaking out and talking about how this is like the Fortnite killer. I would hear that all the time when I was like in high school about Halo. Like, this is going to be the Halo killer. Like, this is going to be the first person shooter that's going to take down Halo. And nothing ever really did. I mean, I guess Call of Duty in a way did, but nothing ever, as far as I'm concerned, ever came close to Halo. And really, honestly, I don't think that it's going to take down Fortnite. It's only been out for a week, and so a lot of people are playing it, and a lot of people are interested in it. And it's a really good game. Like, it's really well balanced and just really well put together. I'm probably going to play this more than I'll play Fortnite from now on, but that may change. But I think as far as the viewers on Twitch and whatever, I think that'll level itself out. But the thing that I think this Apex Legends is really going to kill is I think PUBG, which was already kind of circling the drain from what I understand. I never really played that game, but it seems so similar, and the audience seems so similar, that Apex Legends is just going to kill PUBG. So I think Fortnite will be fine because it does tend to have a younger audience. Apex Legends is more of the Call of Duty Black Ops, more realistic shooter type of game. So it's a little bit more intense than I think Fortnite is. Fortnite has building. There's no building in Apex Legends. Thank God, because I'm fucking awful at that. And I really struggled at Fortnite because I could never get the hang of building. But there's other stuff in it, like the special abilities and whatnot. So I don't think this is a Fortnite killer. I think that the views will balance each other out, but it's going to kill PUBG for sure.
Yeah, so I heard about this game earlier this week when it was released. It's something that it sounds like me and my buddies might do once or twice a week. Maybe, but I didn't realize that EA had bought the studio that made Titanfall. So
yep,
that's disappointing. But yeah, I mean, it sounds fun. So I do plan on downloading this to my Xbox pretty soon.
Yeah, man, I would definitely suggest it. I think you would get a kick out of it. It's really fun.
Awesome, man. So you ready for comics?
Yeah, what'd you read this week?
So I read a pretty random comic that I just happened to find on Comixology called The Girl in the Bay, issue 1, written by, J.M. DeMatteis and drawn by Corin Howell. So again, I was just browsing Comixology when I found this book and thought I'd give it a go because it sounded really interesting. Basically, it takes place in 1969, and it follows a high school senior named Kathy Sartori. Or nope, not Sartori, Sartori, my bad. She's a bit of a troubled youth. She's in high school, like I said. She basically disobeys her parents. Every opportunity she gets, she's big into things like drinking and dropping acid. And one night she's at a bar with some friends, and she starts to have this bad acid trip. So she runs outside and starts to talk to this man she meets. The book basically starts to paint this picture of a potential love story because the two eventually kiss and embrace, but then the panel pulls out and reveals that the man has stabbed her quite a number of times in the gut, and then he pushes her into the bay that they're standing by. So Kathy eventually gathers her strength together and she's able to get to shore, but when she gets home, she can't find her family. So after talking to neighbors and seeing the hints of what's around her, she realizes it's 2019 and 50 years have passed in a night. So she tracks down the new home of the Sartoris, but when she gets there, she expects to see her parents, and instead she finds an older version of herself that never died, which is basically the conclusion she makes about what's going on. So is that she's died, and then in some alternate reality, she never died, and that's where she's at this point. So if I'm being honest, I didn't expect much out of this book going into it. I thought that it was an interesting concept, and I thought that it had potential, but wasn't really too invested. With that being said, this comic was a real page turner. So sometimes when I read a comic for this segment and take a chance on a new title, it feels a lot like a chore to get through, but this was a truly enjoyable read. So it spins a great narrative with a great mystery around what's going on and how a time jump happens, and I'm really curious to see where they go with that. I'd also say that the art's really good. I typically don't call out colorists because, like they say in Chasing Amy, they're just drawing or they're coloring within the lines. But I thought that James Devlin, the colorist of this book, did a great job of making images jump off the page. It's a very vibrant book, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to him. It's clear that the creative team involved with this book have an idea in mind for where the story is going to go, and I'm definitely eager to see where it goes. So I didn't mention it, but this is a Dark Horse comic, and I don't read a ton of Dark Horse, but this may change that because it's a really cool original concept that like I said, I liked quite a bit.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. I will have to pick your brain a little bit off recording when the second issue comes out, because I'm so afraid with books like this that start off really intriguing that just as you were describing it, I was like, man, this sounds like a book that could really go somewhere. And then the second or third issue comes out and they don't take it the way I want to take it, and I'm just very disappointed. So I'll definitely have to pick your brain when the second issue comes out to see where it's going, because I'm definitely intrigued by it.
Yeah, the one thing I'd say is I don't know if it's a miniseries or not. I don't know how you could drag this out into an ongoing
For sure.
series, so I'm curious about that. But they definitely put a lot of content into issue 1, so hopefully that continues.
Cool, man.
All right, what'd you read?
So I read Wolverine the Long Night, which is written by Benjamin Percy, and the art was done by Marcio Takara, I guess is how you pronounce his name. It's an adaptation of the Wolverine podcast that dropped last year. I'm assuming, Tyler, you never listened to that when it came out?
No, that's the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, so Marvel kind of started a podcast universe, or I guess hopes to start a podcast universe, and they started with Wolverine the Long Dark, which I believe was on like Stitcher Premium for a while, and then like months later it finally dropped as a free to listen to podcast on basically every podcast app. And so I listened to, I think, like the first 5 or 6 episodes. There's 10 episodes, so obviously I didn't make my way through it. The podcast and the comic centers around the Alaskan town of Burns that has been experiencing some strange deaths lately. So strange that eventually a duo of FBI agents are sent to investigate. So like I said, I've listened to most of the podcast, but for me, it was a little too much slow and not enough burn, if that makes any sense. Like, if you understand what I mean by that, it doesn't get where it needs to be to go as quickly as I want it to get to. And I was like, well, I'm kind of interested to see what the comic's going to be like, because if it's a page by page adaptation, then I'm not going to be super interesting, or I'm not going to be super interested. But if they change a few things here and there, that maybe it'll be a little bit more interesting. And there was some cool and interesting moments in the podcast that I was like, well, maybe if I see that in comic form, I'll be a little bit more interested. There's 2 issues now of the comic, but I only got through the first one, and I'm kind of regretting the fact that I went all in and bought both issues on Comixology, because I got through the first one and I was like, nah, I'm done. Like, it's exactly page by page, pretty much exactly the podcast, which doesn't surprise me too much. It does kind of disappoint me, but it doesn't really surprise me because the same guy, Benjamin Percy, is the guy that wrote the podcast as well, that wrote the comic book. So, I mean, obviously he likes this story quite a lot to write it twice, essentially. So there's not enough difference, and this first issue was just really, really boring. I mean, of course, it sets the stage like most podcasts and comics books do that tell a story like this, but it's just not enough. I know where it's going for the most part, and I just know that if every issue is going to be like this, then I'm not going to be interested.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those adaptations. Like Marvel also does the Star Wars movies, an adaptation
Exactly.
comic. And it doesn't, while this is a little different because this is an adaptation of something that was purely audio, it doesn't sound like it was super necessary if you've listened to the podcast.
Exactly. And I honestly, it's funny that you brought that up, because I honestly kept thinking about those Star Wars adaptations as I was reading this. I was like, why even bother? I mean, again, you brought up a good point that podcast is all audio, and so you kind of bring a more visual element to it with the comic book, and that's kind of what intrigued me. I was like, well, this story does have some interesting moments, and maybe if I can get through some of the boring shit. But then I was just like, I started reading it, and the first issue again is page by page adaptation. I was just like, fuck this. Like, I can't do this story twice.
For sure, man. So you ready for nerd news?
Yeah, what do you got this week?
So nothing too crazy. Unfortunately, I had to dig pretty deep, but I do have a few things. So the first is that there was a new trailer released for Child's Play, which is the remake featuring Aubrey Plaza as the mom in this movie. Obviously, it's a reboot, so it's not the Chucky that we've seen over the course of a bunch of movies. It does sound like that character is going to potentially get a show on Sci-Fi, but this is, I guess, a more up-to-date version where the doll seems to be like it probably has to do more so with artificial intelligence than it does with a soul entering a doll's body. So I don't know if you watched it. I mean, it looks fine. I don't know. It doesn't look terrible. There were a couple scenes that really looked like it would be pretty cool once the movie comes out, but for the most part, it's just a retread.
Yeah, I mean, I heard that this came out, and I'm very intrigued by the TV show and the movie, but I'm trying to stay away from it just because I'm so afraid that it's going to be more like not Cult of Chucky, because that was actually pretty good, like Seed of Chucky or Bride of Chucky than the original Child's Play.
For what it's worth, it looks like this trailer is taking it very seriously, where those movies started to not take themselves too seriously, starting with probably like Bride of Chucky. This looks like it's taking itself almost too seriously. So definitely looks pretty scary. Well, no, not. I take that back. It does not look scary. I'd say it looks gritty.
That's good, because that's kind of how the last couple Child's Play movies or Chucky movies, whatever you want to call them, it kind of went back to more horror than anything else.
For sure. So speaking of horror trailers, I didn't originally have this in Nerd News, but I was just reminded that there was a new Pet Sematary trailer that apparently pissed a lot of people off, and I saw you tweeted about it. So I did not watch it, but unfortunately, due to Twitter and not your tweets, but somebody else's tweets, I know the plot point that the trailer spoiled. But I mean, we've said it a lot on the podcast before, but why do that in your marketing material? Like you would,
absolutely,
you would go into a movie like that expecting one thing to happen, and then it could have been like a shocking moment when that thing doesn't happen, and it happens to a different character. But instead, you blow your load 2 months before the movie comes out.
100%. And that's the thing. Like, I know that some people are complaining about the plot twist, and that doesn't necessarily get me, but it's the fact that why spoil that in the fucking trailer? I just don't understand it. And the trailer's a bit longer than the first trailer. I don't know if they considered the first trailer as like a teaser or not. I don't really make a huge distinction between those two of them. Like, it tells you a good chunk of not necessarily the plot, but you get a good chunk of the movie in that first trailer, whatever you want to call it, whether it's an official trailer or a teaser or whatever. So this would be the second trailer. It's a little bit longer, and it just gives you so much of the plot. Like, if you didn't know what Pet Sematary was about, you know what it's about now watching that trailer.
Yeah, That's disappointing, man. Especially for me, since that's one of my Rotten Tomato movies. I don't think that that's a good cloud to have hanging over your head as you go into the movie's release, and of course, people writing reviews about it. So I don't think that's going to bode well with critics.
100%.
So again, this is just a story I figured we probably should bring up, even though it's a show that neither of us watch or like anymore. I don't know how to pronounce her name, so I'm going to fuck it up. But Denai Guerrera, who plays Michonne on The Walking Dead, will be leaving after season 10, which in retrospect to me is not surprising. I mean, she was in Black Panther last year, and that movie obviously blew up, and she was in Infinity War, great in Infinity War. I'm sure she's going to be great in Endgame as well. So I would absolutely 100% ditch that fucking show as soon as I could as well.
Oh, yeah, 100%. But the thing is, when you see that they're leaving the show, now that AMC's trying to dip their toes into the Walking Dead movies, is she just going to get her own movie?
Yeah, I would imagine she'll probably pop up in those Rick Grimes movies, right? Or maybe even...
Most likely.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is there used to be surprise deaths on that show or surprise exits from the show, and now it's just them announcing that somebody's leaving. So I can't imagine they're going to kill Michonne, but also I don't give a fuck either. So
yeah, 100%. She's a very talented actress. I love that she's in the Black Panther movies, but I mean, her character is very cool in the comics, and I think she did a really good job on a really shitty show. So I'm glad that she's hopefully moving on and hopefully keep doing her Black Panther thing and moving on to bigger and better things.
For sure. So I have like a couple more stories here, and unfortunately it's something that I don't typically like to do because it's more speculative than anything. But like I said, it was a pretty slow news week. So again, these are more speculative, but I know that you posted about it. So the World War Z sequel's been shelved, but there was somebody online who apparently has a scoop that says even though that movie's not getting a sequel, they hear ramblings that Warner Brothers is looking to do a sequel to Mad Max Fury Road with George Miller. So I was just recently thinking about that movie. I haven't watched it in a couple of years, and it's so good. I mean, I know George Miller said that he had enough material put together when he was developing that movie for a trilogy. And I know the dude's getting up there in age, but I would personally love to see another Mad Max movie. That movie was great.
Oh, yeah, that would be awesome. I know you had already said it, that he had enough material and he had an idea how to make a sequel. I mean, I just hope that it doesn't take him decades to get it done like it did with Fury Road.
I mean, if it takes decades, it's going to be a different director because he will be dead. So like I said, just one more story here, and again, it's speculative, but James Cameron's been doing a lot of interviews lately because he wrote and produced Alita Battle Angel, which I believe we are reviewing next week. In one of his interviews, he was obviously talking about the Terminator movie that he's kind of helped put together, and somebody asked if next on his list would be revitalizing Neil Blomkamp's sequel to Aliens that got shelved whenever they decided they would make Alien Covenant. And he said, I'm working on it. So again, not a lot of weight there, but it's something that James Cameron apparently, allegedly, according to that quote, wants to happen. So I know that both of us weren't too crazy about Alien Covenant. I'd personally love an Alien sequel more in line with the original two movies. And I think Neil Blomkamp's a talented director that could do that, but that would be pretty awesome for me.
Yeah, I mean, I would like a storyline that isn't necessarily in the Prometheus timeline now. That Alien Covenant didn't do as well as I thought it could have. It definitely got super convoluted and just weird. Not that the Alien franchise wasn't already weird, but yeah, I would like them to kind of go back to the original timeline or story or whatever you want to call it. I'm not as confident that Neil Blomkamp can do it after, what was that, Chappie was really, really bad. And I'm not sure that he'd be the one to pull it off, but it's obviously something that he's passionate about. And we've talked about that before. Like, you have to have somebody that's passionate about this franchise or any franchise really, to make the best movie that they possibly can.
Yeah, you want to know the weirdest thing to come out of Chappie for me is that movie's awful. But since seeing that movie, I have come to enjoy the music of the band that stars in that movie.
Really? I had the opposite effect.
D. Antwoord. I don't know, man. I think their shit's really good. My sister-in-law is really into it, and she got my wife into it, who got me into it. So I think that their music's really fun.
Just further evidence, not that we needed, that we just have completely different tastes in music, because I had the opposite effect. I was like, oh, man, they weren't good in this movie, but, I mean, they're more known for their music. And so I listened to them, and I was just like, it's not bad. It's not what I want to listen to.
That's fair, man. All right. So that's all I have for nerd news.
So you didn't know that I was going to do this, and I don't know if this is even going to relate, because I don't know if you've seen it, but I do have a trailer trash for you if you want to get into it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Let's talk about it.
This is kind of good news, bad news. So I was watching the trailer before What Men Want, and I almost called it What Women Want, but What Men Want, and that movie was bad, so I assumed that there was going to be some bad trailers before it, and I was not disappointed. There is a trailer for a movie, and I'm sure you haven't seen it yet. It's called Little. It looks so stupid, man.
I saw half of this trailer. Yes, so my wife and I saw Green Book last night, and we walked into the theater, and this trailer was playing.
It looked so fucking stupid. Just like Freaky Friday bullshit. And I can't stand those type of movies because it's the same joke over and over again. But when I was introducing Trailer Trash, I said this was a good news, bad news situation. I had to watch this stupid trailer, and I kept thinking in my mind as I was watching it, I was like, fuck, Tyler's gonna make me see this fucking movie for one of my punishment movies. But it comes out in April, so there's the good news, because you'll either have to have me watch Breakthrough or you'll have me watch Little. You can't choose both.
Well, we'll see if one of them is still out in May. Maybe that could be your May movie.
But I was pretty happy about that. I was like, man, he can't make me see both of them.
If I have to choose between the two, it's still Breakthrough, because I know
you,
yeah,
100%.
And I know that will be a more excruciating watch for you.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking about that while I was watching this trailer, like which one would I prefer to watch? And it would definitely be Little, even though it would be, as a comedy nerd, it would be torture to watch that fucking movie, but maybe it might surprise me. There's no fucking way that I'm going to enjoy Breakthrough, which I'm looking at it right now. Little comes out on April 12th, so there's fucking no way that it would still be in theaters by May, and then Breakthrough comes out on April 17th. That doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't it come out on the 19th? IMDb does that weird stuff where they break up some of the movies. I don't know why it does that.
I think it's because I know it's like it's coming out around Easter, right?
Maybe.
Because
that makes sense.
It's kind of like a religious movie, and obviously with Easter being a religious holiday, so maybe it's coming out in the middle of the week for the Easter holiday.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, it comes out on the 17th. So I really highly doubt that either one of these movies, for my sake, I highly doubt that neither one of these movies are still going to be out in May.
Well, I can't gamble. Yeah, I mean, I can't gamble. So it's got to be Breakthrough for April. But I mean, I don't have one picked out for May yet. So we'll see what May is.
For sure.
All right, man. All right. Ready for our main topic?
Yeah, so our main topic this week is we're going to review the Lego Movie 2, the second part, which was directed by a guy named Mike Mitchell, who has done a lot of animated films. He did Trolls and I think it was the latest Alvin and Chipmunks movie, the Chipwrecked or whatever it was called. He did that one.
Don't act like you don't know what it's called.
I didn't know what it was called, but I haven't seen any of them, so I don't know why I pretended I didn't know that it was called Chipwrecked. I also just didn't want to say Chipwrecked, so there's that.
Now you've said it 4 times.
Yeah, thanks for forcing me to do that. It was written by Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, not Chipwrecked. The Lego Movie 2 was written by Phil Lord and Christopher Miller. And so essentially, it's been 5 years since Taco Tuesday. Emmett and the gang are living in a post-apocalyptic world similar to Mad Max, and they are on constant alert due to the threat of alien attacks. So I have trashed comedy sequels in the past, basically because, and I don't want to rehash a lot of what I've said, but basically it seems like comedy sequels. It just takes everything that works with the first movie and just kind of turns it up to 11, and that's not usually how comedy works. And some of the other Lego films haven't been as good as the first movie. However, I was pretty excited for this movie. Like, it's one of those rare films where I felt like I should shut off all of that stuff, shut off my film nerd brain that I talk about all the time, because despite all of the things I just said about comedy sequels and the other Lego movies, I thought that the first Lego movie was going to be awful. I thought it was going to be a straight cash grab. It didn't deserve to be made, all of that other stuff that everybody was saying about it, and it proved everybody wrong. So if any movie deserved the benefit of the doubt, I felt like it was this movie, because the first movie had no right to be good. So I didn't want to go into it thinking, well, there's just no way that the sequel to this movie is going to be any good, because it's a sequel and comedy sequels usually don't work and all that other stuff. So I was basically I'm going to ignore all of that because the first one proved me wrong and it deserves the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I was pretty excited for this movie because, like you said, the first one was a surprise, and this movie is getting very good reviews. It's got an 84% on Rotten Tomatoes right now, which bodes well for you because that's one of your picks. So I got to see this movie 2 weeks ago early, and so I've had a lot of time to think about it. So that's going to be interesting for the review. But yeah, going into it, I mean, I was excited enough to see it early, so I was definitely pumped.
So before we get started, I do want to mention real quick, this movie-going experience wasn't quite as weird as What Men Want, but it was a weird experience. So I don't know how it was for you, like you just said that you saw it early, and typically when we see those types of movies, there's not that many previews. Well, with this movie, I've talked about this before, like when I go see movies by myself, I try to time it. Because AMC, since A-List, it seems like their previews have gotten longer and longer, and I've actually tracked it to be like 23 minutes, which is ridiculous. So I've kind of started trying to time it where I will literally sit down right before a movie's about to actually start. So I've been doing that with the movies that I see by myself, but my wife actually likes to go see the previews. So I saw this with her, and we sat down like a minute before the previews were going to start. And so I was like, I kind of settled, put all my stuff away. I was ready to go, and it was like 6:44, and the previews were supposed to start at 6:45. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go pee real quick. So I walk out thinking I have plenty of time. I come back in, and the movie has already started. I missed like a good 30 seconds to a minute of this movie because apparently, according to my wife, it just started. Like almost as soon as I walked out, it just started, but the sound was all messed up and you couldn't hear anything. So my wife missed like the first 30 seconds of this movie because she couldn't hear anything. And so it was just a very weird experience. So I missed the first minute of this movie. Hopefully it doesn't like crush my review, which I don't think it will, just because my wife told me what happened. But yeah, it was a very weird experience because for the first like 15, 20 minutes of this movie, I was thinking there has to be something wrong, and I was just like afraid that the movie was just going to kind of crash.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like more of a theater issue than anything. They fucked something up there for sure.
Yeah, and so I was kind of in a weird mindset when I was watching this movie because, like I said, for the first like 15, 20 minutes, I was afraid that it was going to crash again and we were going to lose the sound or we were going to lose the movie as a whole. And so it's not necessarily the most conducive for a review. So I just wanted to put that out there that I did have a very weird movie-going experience, and I just think that's important to put that out there. So at least take my review with a little bit of a grain of salt.
Awesome. You ready to get going?
All right, so if this is your first episode, we break down these reviews like we break down the episode as a whole into segments. And so we like to start off with kind of just a general overview. We call it broad strokes. So how'd you feel about the Lego Movie 2?
So I will cut to the chase. I liked this movie, but I definitely did not walk away from it loving it as much as I love the first one. I think that this movie is fun and it's mostly funny, but I had some story issues, and it's not fun or funny. It's not as fun or as funny as the first movie was, and the story is just not as good. So take everything about the Lego Movie that you love and downgrade it a little bit, and you have the Lego Movie 2. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's not a bad movie because even though it's a downgraded version of the Lego movie, that movie was really great. So it just didn't live up to that original, which a lot of sequels don't.
100%. And I think one of the main reasons the first film stuck with so many people and it hits so many people as hard as it did when it first came out, not just the fact that it was super funny, which it is, and it still holds up. I didn't watch it prior to seeing this movie, but I've seen it recently within the last year, I think. So it was definitely fresh on my mind, and it's still a really funny movie, was the fact that the end concept was really cool. Like the fact that the father is really serious about his Legos and the kid just wants to play and have fun and bond with his father. Like that stuff hit a lot of people, and it was a very cool concept. Like they took what could have been, what I said earlier, a cash grab, and they made it into a very relatable movie that was very funny, and it definitely had a very cool meta concept to it. And I think all of that stuff was great, but what they did with the second movie, which kind of goes back to what I was saying about the comedy sequels, is they took something that was important with the first film and they felt like it was the most important part of that movie. And the most important part of that movie was just the fact that the first movie was really, really funny. They took that weird concept, that meta concept, and they turned it up to 11. And for me, it just didn't work as well. It was super convoluted. It was just way too complex. It reminded me of very much how I felt about time travel movies. Is the concept they had to constantly explain and re-explain what was happening, and it just was too complex, and it just took me out of the movie. While the movie was funny, and I completely agree with you, it wasn't as funny as the first one. I definitely did not laugh as much as I thought I was going to. I smiled a little bit. It was definitely a very cute movie. It just, the concept constantly took me out of it because they were just explaining it and over explaining it so much. And again, I felt like they took what they thought was the biggest part of the first movie, and maybe it was for most people, it just wasn't for me. And then they turned it to 11, and it just, again, took me out of the movie.
I honestly thought this was going to be one of the rare occasions where we disagreed. I expected you to love this movie, but it sounds like, per usual, we're kind of on the same page here.
For sure. And I think that happens every time. Like, if I think we're going to disagree, we end up agreeing, and vice versa. It's the ones that I'm like, oh, okay, there's no way that we're going to like this movie or we're going to dislike this movie, and then one of us will surprise the other. But when we think that we know each other, it turns out that we're pretty much the same.
For sure.
All right, so story-wise, what'd you feel about Lego Movie 2?
So I think that this movie had a harder time knowing what it was going to be as opposed to the original Lego movie. So, the original was more of a linear story with an added cute twist at the end, like you were mentioning, like the live action stuff, whereas this movie played like a dog that kept seeing a squirrel. The plot was a little chaotic and jumped all over the place, and it even fucked with the precedent set in the original movie about there being humans behind the stories that were being told with these toys. So with this movie, you still have the human element like you were talking about in your broad strokes, but it doesn't make as much sense. And the culmination of the human side of the story is extremely obvious. I even guessed who would be playing the parent in this movie somehow before they appeared on the screen. But you also have the convoluted story that's going on with the toys that, spoiler alert, fucks with time travel for some weird reason and blurs the line between whether or not this is some kid's imagination or really happening, which is dumb to me because that's what was endearing about that first movie, like very similar to what you were saying in broad strokes. However, even though I have these gripes and thought it was a dumb story for the most part, I thought a lot of the jokes really landed in this movie, and I thought the music was pretty good too. It definitely wasn't an unenjoyable experience, and there's fun to be had with this movie, but I definitely found myself looking at my watch a lot more than I would have liked. And I think that at the end of the day, it all comes back to the story kind of being a bit of a mess.
Yeah, my biggest thing with this story, and I touched a little bit on it with broad strokes, is, so I've talked about this before with personally, like, I was just kind of a shitty kid. Like, my dad and I never really got along when I was a teenager. And so stories like that, especially in the first one, like, that connects with me. But I was also a shitty family member to the rest of my family. And I didn't have the same experience with a little sister because my sister was older than me, but I did have similar experiences with my little brother, and I was a shitty little brother, or a shitty big brother to my little brother. And that's something that I always regret. And when they started to get into that stuff, I thought, okay, well, this is going to hit me just as hard as the first one because I can relate to it. But for whatever reason, it felt so heavy-handed that I didn't really roll my eyes physically, but I kind of felt metaphorically rolled my eyes because I was just like, man, they're really trying too hard. So in the first one, it hit me because it was so shocking. It was so clever the way that they did that. And then the second one, it was so obvious and heavy handed that it just didn't connect like the first one did. And they tried really hard to make the mom character really funny, and that just didn't work for me. It was pretty obvious what they were trying to do with the Armageddon stuff.
Yeah, because they called it Armamageddon. It was super fucking obvious.
It was really super, super obvious. So I was just kind of waiting for the mom character to appear. And I will say, in defense of this movie, the way that they used Will Ferrell was pretty funny. I did enjoy that, where he was just like absent father that's kind of yelling from the other room. I did get a kick out of that. So I will give them credit where credit's due. I didn't laugh as much as not even as much as I did in the first one, but I didn't laugh as much as I thought I was going to. Like, I always assume that the sequel for a movie that I think is really funny is just not going to be as funny. So I definitely have that bias going into it, but I didn't even laugh as much as I thought I was going to, given the fact that it was a comedy sequel. So I think that was the part that was most disappointing for me. It wasn't even the story, it was just the fact that I just didn't think it was as funny as the first one.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so moving right along, this is going to be, I feel like, a pretty quick one. Performance-wise, how'd you feel about it? And, of course, we're talking about voice performances. I guess in this movie, we could also talk about the live-action performances as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had more to say here, but it's similar to a lot of things when we talk about sequels. Like, these people know their characters, so I would say that all of the people that returned did a really great job. You know, Chris Pratt had an added character in... What is it? Something Danger Vest?
I can't remember his first name. It's like Rick or something like that.
Yeah.
Rex.
Rex Danger
Rex.
Vest. Yeah. So, you know, I thought that was funny. I again, it's spoiled in the trailers, but he's basically playing, you know, a character that's kind of a rip on some of the roles that he's done in the last few years. So I thought that was funny. I thought that he did a good job kind of differentiating between Rex and between Emmett. I still think Elizabeth Banks is really good. Will Arnett is still really hilarious as Lego Batman. I mean, I guess at that point you kind of get into the newcomers. So Tiffany Haddish was a newcomer in this movie. You know, I don't know that I'm in her demographic typically in the movies that she does, because I'm not actually seeing any of her movies. So obviously I'm not super interested, but I thought that she was really charming in this movie. I think that she has like the perfect voice for voice acting, and her character was really funny. So I definitely thought that Tiffany Haddish brought something cool to the movie. And then I guess the other person that was new would be Maya Rudolph, who, spoiler alert, plays the mom in this movie. So you talked about live action. I think Maya Rudolph is really charming. I think that she didn't have a lot to work with, though. So she was trying super hard in her scenes, like you said.
Absolutely.
You know, they tried to make her really funny, and I think she was giving it her all, but the material just wasn't as funny as she thought it was. So besides that, you know, there's if you go through the cast list of this movie, there's a lot of big names that have bit parts. And I think a lot of it works, and the performances, for the most part, are not what's wrong with this movie.
100%. I thought that Chris Pratt did a really good job. He can't go over the top playing two different characters, like, especially given the plot of this movie. But I think that he did a good enough job distinguishing between the two characters. So I was really impressed with that. Maya Rudolph, I completely agree with what you said. Like, they tried way too hard, and I think she was trying a little bit too hard. I think that she's at her best in movies like Away We Go, where she's not trying to be funny. She's just naturally funny. Like, she's just a funny person. And so I thought she was a little over the top in her performance just because, again, they were trying a little bit too hard. Everybody else did a really good job. I will say that, and it's kind of a weird character to point out, but I'm a fan, so I wanted to point it out. I thought Nick Offerman does a really good job as the pirate because you cannot tell it's Nick Offerman at all. Like, I could, like, listening to him, I knew it was him, but I couldn't tell just by listening to the voice that it was him. And that's kind of the perfect performance as far as I'm concerned is, and we've talked about this a million times. Like, I want to listen to somebody that I know is a recognizable voice, but I don't want to sit there and think about who's doing the voice the whole time. And I think that he did a really good job of changing it up, and I think that he plays a really good pirate for some reason. And so that was somebody that, again, doesn't have a huge role, but I really like his performance quite a lot.
Awesome. So for our last segment, you want to do animation or humor?
Let's just kind of do both because, I mean, we've kind of touched on both of them, but I did want to talk a little bit more about the animation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the animation was pretty good. I know that whenever we were doing the podcast when the first Lego movie came out, weren't we? Or were we not?
Yeah, we were, because I think that was the first Oscar reaction that we did for the Obsessive Viewer, and we just bitched that the Lego movie wasn't nominated.
Yeah, that sounds right. So I really liked the animation in that movie. I thought that they chose a cool way to do it, kind of with the stop-go stuff, and that returns here. It's not bad. I don't know that it's as stop-go-y as it was in that first movie, if that makes sense. And then the only thing that I'll say about the animation that I didn't like was the kind of transition from animation to live action didn't feel great for some reason to me. But I mean, for the most part, similar to what we say a lot of times when we review animated movies, you know, technology's come such a long way that it's hard to make a bad looking movie.
Yeah, for sure. And I think actually we're going to disagree a little bit. I think the combination of the animation and live action stuff, you didn't get as much of that in the first movie. And I think there was a lot more of that in this movie. And I thought that was really cool. The way that they combined those two things was really cool. So I actually liked that a lot more than it sounded like you did. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about the animation a little bit. And honestly, I thought the animation was awesome. I thought it was awesome in the first one. I thought it was awesome in this one. Like, it really, this is going to sound stupid because obviously it is, but it really felt like you were playing the Legos. And that was really cool to me.
Awesome.
All right, so as far as the humor is concerned,
yeah.
Again, we have talked about this a little bit already. I just didn't think it was that funny. I mean, it has its moments. I smiled a little bit. It's definitely cute. It's more cute than funny, like laugh out loud funny, which the first one is for sure laugh out loud funny, and it holds up a lot.
Yeah, it honestly just made me want another Lego Batman movie because...
Really?
Well, yeah, because Will Arnett's stuff is some of the funniest stuff to me. And then besides that, the other thing that I would say is really funny about this movie is the music. Even the song that plays during the credits by The Lonely Island was
that
great.
was the funniest part of the movie for me.
Yeah. So the songs are great, just like Everything Is Awesome was great. But unfortunately, that only makes up a very small part of the movie. So you're kind of forced with some humor that's more in line with like the Lego Ninjago movie as opposed to Lego Batman or the original Lego movie.
For sure. So, star rating out of 5 stars. How'd you feel about the sequel to Lego?
I had started this review as a 3.5, but I think I talked myself out of it as we got going, and I'm going to go with a 3.
Yeah, absolutely. 3 stars for me as well. I'm just curious. So, we've talked about this a little bit in the last few episodes, and Tyler does not know that I'm going to ask him this. So I'm curious. We talked about this a little bit, like I said, and a little bit more off recording. We have kind of gotten away from collecting more physical media, and so I'm curious. I love the first movie. I own the first movie on Blu-ray. I don't think I had a 4K at the time, so I don't own it on 4K, but I do own it on Blu-ray. Will you own this on Blu-ray?
That's a good question because I have definitely gotten more into buying stuff on iTunes now that I don't
Yeah.
And I've kind of reserved the Blu-ray stuff for stuff I really like. But there's also the part of me that's a completionist. So if I own Lego Batman on Blu-ray and I own the original Lego movie on Blu-ray, I might feel as though I need to own a physical copy of this as opposed to owning it on a digital medium, if that makes sense.
It makes 100% sense, at least to a nerd like me that feels the same way. Like, I'm conflicted because I love the movie so much. I own Lego Batman on Blu-ray as well, even though I didn't like that movie as much as I wanted to. It's still a good movie. I still think it's Blu-ray worthy, but this movie I'm going to have a really hard time buying.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be a go out and buy it week one type situation, or maybe it'll be a situation where I'll wait for like a Black Friday or something to see if it goes down. But I'd assume at some point I'll probably pull the trigger on a physical copy.
So this might be a conversation for a different podcast or whatever, but I'm almost getting to the point where I literally used to do this thing, and I still kind of in the back of my mind want to do it, but I've fallen away from it. I would buy something like a Blu-ray or 4K or whatever, and then I'd be like, I'm not going to put this in my collection until I've watched all the special features and stuff like that. And my backlog just got so large trying to do that I just kind of gave that up just recently. And so I'm kind of getting to the point, like, why am I buying all this stuff if I'm not consuming everything that it has to offer? Like, I think the last thing I did that with was the Halloween Blu-ray that I bought, which was I watched all of that stuff, and I just don't do that enough with all the stuff that I buy. And so I'm almost getting to the point where if it's not Star Wars, if it's not Marvel, I might not buy it just because I can buy it on Amazon and own it digitally, and it doesn't take a spot in my Blu-ray collection.
Yeah, I've definitely shifted that way too. A couple years ago, for example, I would have blind bought The Girl in the Spider's Web, because I didn't get to see that when it was in I didn't get to see it when it was in theaters, and I wanted to. So instead of, renting it on iTunes or something, I would have just bought it and watched it and added it to my collection. And now it's that, that movie, I know it's out, I know it's available, but I'll probably just rent it on Amazon, or on iTunes when it's really cheap, as opposed to, like I said, blind buying it. The last Blu-ray I bought was Halloween, and I looked at the Blu-ray release schedule, and there's nothing coming out for a while that I even remotely want. So, yeah, my mindset's definitely shifted.
For sure. Don't bother seeing that movie. I don't care how cheap it is. Unless it's free, don't watch that fucking movie. It's not good.
Yeah, so, that's a good point. Maybe I'll wait for it to be on Netflix.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I did the same thing with A Simple Favor. I'd heard good things about that, and my wife really wanted to see it. She's a big fan of Anna Kendrick, and of course, Paul Feig does a lot of cool stuff, and he did that movie. That movie sucked. I hated it. It was so fucking stupid.
What's funny is you bring that up. I bought that on iTunes because it was on sale for like $10. And
I bought it on Amazon as well.
Yeah, it had just come out, and I was like, oh shit, I really wanted to see this. And it's got a good score on Rotten Tomatoes. It does sound like I liked it more than you did, because I don't think it sucked, but I probably shouldn't have bought it for $10.
No, I bought it kind of for my wife. I was like, you know what? You've been wanting to watch this for a long time, and we never saw it in theaters because we had a ticket for it, but for some reason something happened that night. I wasn't a huge fan, so I wasn't like heartbroken that we never saw it in theaters. But then I bought it kind of for her, and I was like, man, now I own a copy. Digital copy, so it makes it feel a little bit better. But I was like, man, now I own a copy of A Simple Favor that I will literally never watch. And my wife didn't even like it either. She thought it was pretty dumb as well.
Yeah, so maybe we're not blind buying Blu-rays, but there's still that piece of us a little bit. So,
all right, so to end each episode, we like to end it with a nerd favorite, which the topic changes from episode to episode. We take turns picking the topic. It is my week, and I decided to do something a little bit different. We talked about this, I think either last episode or 2 episodes ago, when the rumor was that Ben Affleck was no longer going to be doing Batman anymore. We didn't really talk about who we thought could be the next Batman. And so I thought that would be kind of a cool nerd favorite. Usually the format is your favorite blank and whatever the topic is this week. But it's kind of morphed into more like, I want to ask you this question. So that's what we're doing this week is I'm going to ask you who you think or who you would want to be the next Batman. And so the rumor is with Matt Reeves is it's going to be a younger Batman. So that's kind of where my mindset went was I'm going to pick somebody that's older because I think John Hamm could be a good Batman. I think there like Jake Gyllenhaal was the rumor a couple of years ago. And I think those could be good Batmans. But if you're going to go younger, that's obviously not the route that you would go. And so my mindset went to obviously somebody younger. I know the rumor that I've been hearing is it's Robert Pattinson or whatever his fucking name is. And even though, I mean, you can make a lot of jokes about him with Twilight stuff, but he's been doing a lot of more indie stuff, and he's been getting a lot of good reviews for that kind of stuff. I haven't watched any of those movies, so I don't know if he's good in them, but I've heard that he's good in them. So I know that a lot of people will make jokes if he does get cast as Batman, and I look forward to laughing at some of those memes, but I don't think it's the worst choice. Like, if this news came out or this rumor came out after the Twilight movies, I could understand that, but it's been years since those movies, and he's done some very eclectic stuff since then. So that'd be interesting. But my choice, and I've kind of been stalling because I feel like it's an obvious choice and I wanted to give Tyler enough time to think about his choice. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, it's such an obvious choice. It's just like literally staring me in the face. It's got to be the hyphen, Joseph Gordon-Levitt. He's got to be Batman, right?
He already did his Batman stint. Like, it would be so hard to make him Batman and then not tie it to The Dark Knight Rises.
But I mean, I feel like people are smart enough now to know that those aren't together. Like, I don't think anybody would go to a new Batman movie and was like, hey, he was this guy in this other thing, so they must be connected.
No, if there's a world where people take infant children to What Men Want and change their diapers, they are not smart enough to know the difference.
But I also feel like those people wouldn't remember that he was in this other movie 10 years ago.
I don't think that he's a bad choice, like, at all. I think that he could completely do it. I just think that you have that cloud hanging over your head of The Dark Knight Rises, and you have to connect it to that somehow.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I don't think that he would be a realistic choice because of what you just said. But that's not the question. The question is, who do I want to be Batman?
Okay.
And that's who I want to be Batman.
Well, if that's the question, you know who I want to be Batman? Christian Bale. So
that's true, I guess.
They should make The Dark Knight Returns movie, and not necessarily comic book wise, like, because that franchise never had super heroics or anything in it, but you could 100% do a movie called The Dark Knight Returns with Christian Bale coming back to the role as an older Batman. That being said, that is not my answer. My answer is somebody who's been not rumored for the part, but I think that a name that's been out there before, and I think that he'd be awesome. It's Jack Houston, who played Richard Harrow on Boardwalk Empire. He looks the part. He's a great actor. You know, he plays kind of a troubled soul on Boardwalk Empire, like this tortured guy who's physically disfigured and still kind of a badass on that show. So I think that he could 100% has the chops and the looks to be Bruce Wayne.
For sure. I don't know. And again, kind of making fun of myself, like, this is who you want to be Batman, not who you think will be. But just out of curiosity, like, I don't think he necessarily has the chops in Hollywood to pull that off anymore. Like, I don't know if they would definitely, because of like Ben-Hur and stuff, like, I mean, he's had some bombs since he was in Boardwalk Empire, so I don't know if he would necessarily get cast.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds like, from what I've read at least, that they want to go with a big name, which makes sense.
Yeah,
because it's Batman, and I don't think that he's a big name by any stretch of the imagination. So that being said, I don't think Robert Pattinson's a big name anymore either, so I'm really curious what route they go.
For sure, and I think the quote is that they want a familiar face, so I guess you don't necessarily have to be a big name, but yeah, I don't think that they choose somebody like that.
Yeah, I guess I would assume we'll see soon. I think that they're going to have to probably start casting within the next few months if they're going to go into production later this year.
For sure.
Awesome, man.
All right, so that's it for episode 227 of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast. Of course, we hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure that you subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. We're on it. You can also check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. I'd appreciate if you comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google Plus for the little time that Google Plus has left. Email us at thenerdyourlookingfor@gmail.com. And finally, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we're the Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, nerds.
Later, guys.